when we came to Brunswick, didn't take long to realise that the only real natural area were the creeks on either side of Brunswick, and obviously Merri goes right up through Coburg and Fawkner, so the newer city of Moreland, it's the boundary, the eastern boundary. But the creek was threatened by a freeway.
The original route for that would have crossed the creek 6 times back and forth because the creek bends in that area. So it was just a straight line coming down the valley, and we didn't like that idea very much.
The freeway campaign was a long one, and it's like a lot of big projects, government type projects, so they can be promoted, and if there's community objection, it all goes quiet for a while, and then a few years later it rears its ugly head. So that was really about maintaining community pressure and lobbying the government.
So we fought quite a big battle and a big community campaign, letterbox drops and town hall meetings and all sorts of stuff for some years about that freeway, and went to the federal court over it, and eventually got the freeway. We didn't stop the freeway, but moved it sideways so it only crosses the creek once. So that's a partial victory, quite a decent victory. But in that process, lots and lots of people joined the Friends.
So in 1976, the creek was degraded, severely degraded. So there's a long history of industry along the creek. Way back in this early period of settlement, there were abattoirs, there were other offensive industries. So the creek had been abused.
So we joined with other people who were interested in restoring the creek to a bushland corridor and fighting off the threats like of the freeway that was planned along the creek valley. From there, a number of local groups along the Merri got together with councils, particularly Fitzroy Council, which hosted the first meeting of councils and community groups interested in restoring the Merri Creek.
Working with the other groups, tree planting was the most important thing we felt to start with. And so we worked out what the local Indigenous plants were and wrote a planting guide for that. And then the different groups would be running their own plantings. But planting is very problematic because they're disturbed sites along the creek. Some of them have been filled. The creek is very fertile, and so you're trying to plant something and then you've got all this weed, out of control weed growth, and council staff were unfamiliar with how to manage that properly. So after a few years it became really obvious you could have a big planting and lots of people, but actually the survival of the plants was very low. So we reset, the whole thing was reset, and it was felt that the best thing to do was to encourage passive recreation. That was the end point. The real point about tree planting was to make it nice for people as a park, but actually you needed people there and get them to appreciate it. So the focus moved to establishing the Merri Shared Pathway.
For the state government funding for Victoria's 150th anniversary paid for a design to be done by consultants for the pathway, actually locating the route, which is not as simple as it sounds, and specifications for building the path. And then each council was responsible for building their section, and they all did it slightly differently. So luckily they all join up, which was one of the purposes of having a single plan. But they certainly built to different standards. And we're still sort of, they're still sorting that one out. But that was a really important catalyst, I think, for bringing the local community down. Local residents could come, get access to the creek and see its potential and start enjoying it. And that increased the support for further revegetation and parkland development. We eventually decided that you needed skilled people doing the job as a job, not just relying on volunteers to do this revegetation work. It would take forever, you'd never get there. So so part of the activity was to encourage councils to put money into what became the Merri Creek Management Committee and employ staff who do the revegetation, but also act as advocates and a central hub for information about the creek, educate the community about the values and how to look after the creek. I've been talking to a few people who knew the creek before 1970, just to get their, their perspectives and descriptions of what it was like. And the interesting thing is that earlier in the 20th century, adults didn't seem to go to the creek at all much. It was just a wilderness. There was nothing for them there. But kids loved to go and play there if they could get away from their parents, and they'd really enjoy, a real adventure play. And we've always been conscious of the need not to neaten up the place too much. And we, it's really great to see bush kinders happening along various parts of the creek now. Kindergartens taking the kids regularly to play in the mud, whatever the weather, in the trees, with sticks and stones, and that's a really good development. But still, it should be an adventure playground for kids. But it's now bringing a lot of adults down to enjoy it too. So that's part of the whole transformation. Enjoy it and learn about nature and learn, get involved in planting, getting your hands dirty, and seeing things grow.
There's about 6 different migration routes of birds that use the Merri Creek. So you've got some who live here, but there's other birds who come from Queensland to nest. There's birds that come here in winter from Tasmania, so in summer they go to Tasmania. There's other birds that go into the mountains in summer and come back down onto the plains. And then there's birds that live inland, and when there's a big drought they come to the wetter areas to live. So all of these migration patterns happen. They've all happened in the last 5 years because we see the birds coming and going, and so having a habitat for them, having somewhere for them to come is really, really important. Otherwise, that's it. There's nowhere to go when things are tough.
And how do you feel when you enter the creek space these days?
Yeah, when I go to the creek, how do I feel? I feel really happy actually. I mean, it's great to see the transformation. So that's, the effort's definitely been worth it.